Greetings, friends, and mostly enemies. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I think is one of my strong suits as a writer, and something that I have felt increasingly comfortable making a video about as I've gotten more and more feedback about my work. You can tell by the title of the vid. Today we're going to talk about writing a good protagonist. So, this is universal, in my opinion. It doesn't matter if your protagonist is man, woman, white, black, if you're... And actually, this applies to main characters, too. It doesn't necessarily have to be your protagonist. If your main character is the villain, and the book is written from their perspective, these tips still apply. Because this is kind of just writing good characters in general, but each point has to really be focused on and really hammered home to make sure your main character or your protagonist is as good as they can be. So let's get into it and give you some nuance and detail as I go through the list here. So number one, and this is universal if you want a character to be noticed and well liked and received, they need a clear, distinct, and dominant personality. Okay? Now this is the dominant part applies mostly to your main characters and protagonists and antagonists. Okay? If it's a side character, you might want to rein in how dominant their personality is because they can steal the show or distract attention from where you want it. So it's okay to give side characters more passive or subservient personalities here and there. You don't want every side character to be that way, but your main character, I would argue that they should almost always have a dominant personality, unless your story is kind of about them coming into their own and their kind of evolution from being this more laid back beta type personality and moving into a more dominant personality. If that's your story arc, then obviously you're going to start in that more passive, relaxed beta personality. But for a story like mine and many other stories where we're kind of starting and there's action to be had pretty much right away, and because by chapter 3 of my book there's some pretty significant action, we need the protagonist to have a set, well-developed, and interesting personality right out the gate. And dominant personalities are better for main characters because you want them to command attention. You want them to command interest. And the fact of the matter is, in general, passive, laid-back, lackadaisical people generally don't command interest. We glance over them when we're looking around. Okay? That's just how it is. Nothing against those types of people. You just don't hold interest as much as more dominant personalities. And again, nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just a fact. So how do we write a dominant, strong personality? Well, this person is typically outspoken. This person is typically not very agreeable to things that they don't innately agree with, right? So if you raise a disagreement with this person about a way of doing something, they're not going to just go along with what you want to do because they want to avoid the fight. They're going to say, no, we should do it my way, and here's why. And if they're sassy or upset that day or they have depending on the relationship they have with the person arguing with them, they might add on something like, you stupid bitch. Okay? When you write a dominant personality, it's their way or the highway most of the time. And that's good for a lot of reasons, and it can also be a useful character flaw, because lack of agreeableness, depending on where it is on the spectrum of agreeableness, can be a serious strength and almost always an asset, but it can be pushed too far into being a serious hindrance, right? And so that's a fun character trait to play with, but you almost always, for a main character and an antagonist, protagonist and antagonist, I would say you almost always want to err towards more disagreeable. Because the more disagreeable a character is, the more conflict they're going to have with other characters around them and the world, and that makes for a good story. Okay? And that's what you need from your protagonists and your antagonists, your main characters. You need them to generate conflict, because that's what's interesting. So, agreeableness is a very good character trait to understand and play around with. And then, of course, there's other very strong personality traits like honor, loyalty, integrity, honesty. Okay? Playing with the levels of these very strong, dominant personality traits can really give you some very interesting characters. Let's say we have a character who's very honorable, but they don't have much honesty, right? So they would never do anything that could really significantly harm the people they care about or those around them, or that really goes against their code of honor. But they absolutely love telling white lies because it's a game to them, okay? Because lying isn't against their personal code of honor. And even though it's against some people's code of honor, this person only acknowledges their code of honor. It's what's important to them. And that's another thing that makes characters interesting, is giving them a self-imposed set of rules. They do things the way they want to do them, and they're hard on themselves when they fail to live up to their own standards. That creates internal conflict for the main characters, which is, again, a source of interest. Especially if your characters are interesting in other facets, then their internal conflicts quickly become very interesting. So, that is a huge thing to consider. The next thing that we should really consider is what our main characters' goals are. Odds are good that if they have lofty goals, it's going to be an interesting story. You don't become emperor of the world by laying around your house doing nothing, right? You don't become the shaman king by doing nothing, right? You have to kick some ass and take some names. So, if your character has lofty goals and they're actually out there trying to achieve them, it's going to be an interesting story. Because when you have lofty goals, there's always conflict to achieve them. There's always missteps and difficulties along the way. And again, when these things are written well and well thought out, these are the things that make good stories. So give your characters, especially your main characters, lofty goals. Closely related to that is strong motives. Okay? Notice I didn't say clear motives. There's a very important distinction here I want to make. A strong motivator is something that you really, really feel and believe in. And notice I said feel. Because again, we're talking about strong motives versus clear. You can have unclear motives that are even unclear to you, but they're so strong that you act on them anyways. For example, I'm going to use my own book here because it's relevant and because it's a good example. My main character, Dolge Thorn, has a very strong sense of justice. He has a very strong motive to do what's right, but he doesn't know for sure what's right the entire length of the story. So his motives are strong, but unclear, because he doesn't know what to do to be in the right. And that's a source of internal conflict for him. And let me tell you, it makes for good writing. When you give your characters really strong motivations, especially really strong motivations that they don't have fully fleshed out, don't have fully actualized, the internal conflict they have with themselves while they're trying to sort that out, and the conflict they experience in the world because they don't fully understand their own motivations, again, makes for good sources of conflict, which makes for good writing, assuming it's written well. And I'm not going to coach you on your prose, you got to figure that out on your own. This next one, we're moving into kind of its own, its own separate category, and that's making your characters alive, okay? Giving them clear interests, clear pet peeves, giving them personality. Maybe this person can't fucking stand garlic. Okay, that person is uninteresting and I don't want to know them, but maybe that's your character. I fucking love garlic bread. Get out of here. But maybe, just give them some things like that. Sit down and pick them at random if you have to, but give them to them and hold to them. Make them consistent. Try to find a place to organically mention them a few times. So let's say your character doesn't like garlic and they're allergic to citrus fruit, okay? Well, okay, so have a few scenes in the book, maybe 1 or 2, where, no, that's not quite a few, maybe 2 or 3, where they're at a table, and it could be a running gag that people keep trying to serve them garlic bread and citrus fruit for dessert. And it could be a funny running gag if you wrote it well. And it's not just, it doesn't just apply to food, it applies to everything. Maybe your character absolutely despises whistling, but they hum a song to themselves all the time. Maybe your character only dresses in bright colors because they think wearing dark colors is very depressing. Giving your characters these personality traits, these pet peeves, these interests, makes them feel more alive. It makes them feel more organic, especially when they all kind of line up thematically with each other and they all kind of hold some kind of emotional or logical consistency with each other. It really fleshes the character out. It brings them to life. It makes them believable. And you form a bond with this person or a distaste for this person because they start to tend to remind you of someone you actually know, right? And I've talked about that a little bit before, where when we form an emotional connection with anything in the story, we like the story more and we're more likely to continue reading, buy the next book, etc. So giving your characters these fleshed out personalities is a big step towards making sure your characters are good. And then for point number 5, and this one's a big one because no one likes a Mary Sue. Give your character some vodka, some fucking flaws. Don't make a Mary Sue character. Don't do it. Maybe they have an absolute case of ditziness and they can't remember things 1 minute to the next, okay? ADD, ADHD, whatever. Maybe they have problems with the truth, like I mentioned earlier, and it goes beyond just white lies, and they enjoy telling serious lies because, again, it's a game to them, and they really don't understand how damaging it is to their relationships with the world and people around them. Maybe this person is so far to the hyper extreme of disagreeable that they cannot work as a team, that they literally insist on doing everything exactly their way and they cannot function in any kind of a group. Great character flaws, all of these, because they generate a lot of conflict and they are really inhibiting. And if the character wants to be successful in their goals, they eventually have to work past them. And that creates character growth, which creates more interesting character arcs, which makes the character more alive. And you always want to strive for that. You always want to make your character more alive. And the flaws don't have to be these absolutely deal-breaking character flaws that make their mission practically impossible, like the ones I've just mentioned, right? They can be little things, like, and by the way, they don't have to be strictly personality flaws either. They could be physical flaws. So, for example, your character is trying to be the world boxing champion, but they have a trick elbow. They can't punch with their left arm, and so they have to find a way to achieve their goal, getting around that extremely limiting physical flaw, right? And maybe and you can play with that. You can go into more detail of that. You can decide whether it's a birth defect or an old injury or whatever, and you can build backstory around this flaw and make it a linchpin or something that's a more casual part of the story. And you can do that with every single flaw you give them. And it quickly begins fleshing out this person's backstory and history, and it makes them feel very well thought out and, again, organic and alive. Because We all have those things. We all have flaws, and all of our flaws have some level of backstory to them. Crying out loud. I have eczema. There's a lot of backstory to that. Found out I was diagnosed with it from a very early age, and I've been struggling with it my whole life. And I used to be bullied for it when I was a kid because, you know, kids are dicks. So yeah, any little flaw you give someone, you can add backstory to it, again, as much or as little as possible, and it creates depth. And that's what you want. You want your character to feel alive, to have depth, and to have all these other traits well fleshed out to bring that character to life. If you're writing a main character, you want your reader to like them. And if you don't want your reader to like them, your reader has to at least sympathize with them. Your reader has to want the good guy to succeed. Okay? Even if they're not going to succeed, even if your story is a tragedy and the hero fails in the end, you still want the reader to want them to succeed. Because again, that's what makes it hard-hitting at the end when they ultimately fail. To reiterate, distinct and prominent personality, lofty goals, strong motives, clear from clear motives, strong motives. Okay? You can make them clear later on in the story if you want. Pet peeves and personal interests and flaws. I really feel like these are 5 cornerstone things that you need to have fleshed out and really know, at least in your head, if not written out on paper. You need these things thought out and well written. Because if you don't have these things all fleshed out and well written, there's likely going to be some pretty significant holes in your character, and they're going to lack depth. They're not going to feel organic, and this is how we end up with the Bella Swans of literature, and no one likes that character. Except for the teenage girls who pretend that they're her. So, that's the video. That's my advice on how to write a really good main character. And again, that applies to either your protagonist or your antagonist, and even really prominent secondary characters. If you have some characters that are, you know, kind of protagonist light, then this list also applies to them. Alright guys, see you tomorrow with the next video. If you haven't already, check out my book, The Garden of Lies. Check out the reviews on Goodreads if you're not totally sure about it. Sign up for the pre-order. Get yourself some merch before your opportunity is gone, because pre-order sign-up goes down release day, which is May 17th. So sign up, get yourself some pre-order merch, and I'll see you guys next time.